The moment they mentioned it, I felt my stomach tighten. "We're thinking of giving your Tesla to your sister," my parents said casually, as if discussing the weather. My sister, who had never held a steady job, had always relied on their support, and now they were proposing to take what I had earned, what I had worked for, and hand it over to her without asking me at all. I stared at them, disbelief mingling with anger. This wasn't about generosity, it was about entitlement and control. I remembered the months of research, the careful budgeting, the planning I had done to purchase the Tesla. Every decision, every sacrifice, every hour of work had been for that moment of achievement, my independence, my freedom, my accomplishment. And now, my parents, whom I had supported in countless ways over the years, seemed ready to erase that effort with a single casual statement. It wasn't the car alone. It was the principle, the disregard for my autonomy, the implicit message that my achievements were theirs to redistribute at will. As I sat there, I could feel the familiar pattern of my family dynamics replaying in my mind. My sister, always entitled, never satisfied, had learned to expect indulgence from my parents. They, in turn, had become conditioned to placate her whims, to prioritize her comfort over fairness or reason. And I, as always, had been the one expected to accommodate, to comply, to absorb their decisions without question. But not this time. I felt a spark of clarity amidst the anger. Their entitlement could not dictate my choices. I could no longer allow their favoritism or her dependency to override my hard-earned independence. If you enjoy my content, please subscribe. Your one tap truly motivates me to keep creating for you. I began to consider my options carefully. I could argue, yell, plead, but experience had taught me that confrontation rarely led to resolution. Instead, observation, strategy, and deliberate action often carried far more weight. I decided to take control quietly, to assert my authority in a way they would not anticipate. This was not merely about a car. It was about boundaries, respect, and recognition of my own accomplishments. As the discussion continued, I remained calm externally, but inside, a resolve was forming. I would not allow their entitlement, their assumptions, or their misplaced sense of obligation to my sister to strip away what I had rightfully earned. This was my life, my property, my achievement, and I intended to protect it quietly, strategically, and unassailably. The air was tense, the room charged with expectation, yet I knew that the moment had arrived. How I handled this would define more than just the ownership of a car. It would set the tone for my autonomy, my boundaries, and the respect I commanded moving forward. After that conversation, I retreated quietly, though my mind was far from idle. I began observing the dynamics in the house with an intensity one hadn't before. My sister, confident and entitled, carried herself as if the Tesla was already hers, speaking casually about needing it to get to appointments, to meet friends, to manage her life. My parents, who had always indulged her whims, seemed to nod along, unconsciously reinforcing the narrative she had created. They believed their authority and my compliance would bend the situation to her advantage. They had miscalculated. I realized that my parents' power over me was conditional. It depended on my willingness to acquiesce. By quietly asserting my independence, I could not only protect my property, but also shift the dynamics that had always favored my sister. I began formulating a plan, one rooted in strategy, composure, and leverage. I would not react with anger or confrontation. I would act deliberately, using observation and timing to assert my authority without giving them room to manipulate my emotions. Over the next few days, I started laying the groundwork. I quietly reinforced the boundaries around my property, making clear through my actions and words that the Tesla was mine, and that any attempt to claim it without consent would be unacceptable. I also began emphasizing my independence in subtle ways, taking charge of my own finances, making visible improvements in my work, and demonstrating my capacity to manage my life without reliance on their approval or intervention. Every step I took was calculated to shift perception. I wanted them to see that I was no longer a passive participant in their power games. Meanwhile, I observed my sister carefully. Her confidence, once unshakable, began to show cracks under subtle challenges. When she assumed entitlement over the Tesla, I calmly reminded her of the responsibilities that came with ownership, the planning and effort I had invested, and the boundaries that could not be crossed without consequence. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I let the facts, my composure, and my quiet authority speak for themselves. The turning point came during a family dinner. My parents tried to negotiate, suggesting compromises and testing my patience. My sister interjected, attempting to assert her expectations as a given. I listened calmly, allowed them to speak, and then responded with measured confidence. I emphasized my independence, my ability to make my own decisions, and the effort that had gone into acquiring the car. I spoke with authority, not anger, demonstrating that their attempts at manipulation and entitlement could not intimidate or control me. The effect was immediate. My sister faltered, her smug confidence replaced by hesitation. My parents, who had assumed they could dictate terms and sway my compliance, looked on with surprise and quiet recognition. For the first time, they saw clearly that my autonomy could not be overridden by favoritism, entitlement, or pressure. The Tesla, once a point of contention and potential leverage, had become a symbol of my independence and unassailable authority. By the end of the evening, the power dynamic had shifted permanently. The entitlement that my sister relied upon was neutralized, my parents' assumptions of compliance had been disproven, and I had asserted boundaries without confrontation or drama. I had turned their attempt to manipulate and redistribute my property into a demonstration of resilience, strategy, and control. That night, I reflected on what had transpired. Their sense of entitlement, their assumptions, and their attempts at manipulation had failed. The Tesla remained mine. Yes, but more importantly, the evening had proven a larger truth. My independence, my authority, and my ability to assert boundaries were beyond their control. The quiet patience, observation, and deliberate action I had employed had transformed potential conflict into empowerment. For the first time, I realized that my possessions, my decisions, and my life could not be dictated by the whims of others. The next family gathering felt different. My parents and sister had expected compliance, excuses, or tension, but they found none. I was calm, composed, and unwavering, my quiet authority undeniable. My sister, who had assumed entitlement, faltered under the weight of my composure. My parents, realizing their attempts at manipulation had failed, exchanged uneasy glances. The Tesla, once a point of conflict, now symbolized more than ownership. It represented my independence and self-respect. I hadn't raised my voice or argued. I had simply asserted my boundaries with clarity and confidence. Every subtle gesture and measured word demonstrated that my autonomy could not be overridden by favoritism or expectation. That evening, the balance had shifted. Their entitlement, assumptions, and pressure had all failed, and I had emerged in full control of my property, my space, and my authority.